Welcome back to the Dallas Prospect YouTube channel. Today we're going to be changing things up a little bit, pivoting slightly away from our normal, mostly sports coverage, to take a look at our pop culture content. Recently for the website, I wrote an article talking about the timeline of the Cloverfield movies following the surprise release of the Cloverfield Paradox on Netflix this past weekend. Now, what I and numerous other bloggers, reviewers, whatever, discovered about this timeline is that while it answers some questions, it ultimately doesn't fit together in a meaningful way that people are able to construct a accurate timeline without any doubt. At best, you have a guess that may or may not be right. So, I wanted to do a follow-up video with that wherein I could actually go further into detail and talk about the parallels and give both photographic and video evidence. I rewatched all three films and I followed that up by doing hours of extra research wherein I really found the bulk of the connections through part of the viral marketing campaign each film has done, dating all the way back to the original Cloverfield in 2008. With the original marketing campaign, we knew little about the film. We knew it was going to be a found footage monster flick set in New York City. That was really it. Now this is the found footage of Rob, his brother Jason, his girlfriend Lily, and in it, we don't learn much about the Cloverfield monster. We see that night through the perspective of people in New York running for their lives. Because of this, we don't know about why any of this is happening or any real connections beyond that. All we know is that New York's under attack, the military is fighting back, and they're trying to evacuate the city. Digging into the ARGs for this film, we come across some, really it's an impressive collection here. For the games, we have fake websites, email correspondence, and news broadcasts, which show us a Japanese corporation called the Tagaratu Corporation, which is, I think, at its preliminary base, like a deep sea mining company. And we end up learning that it was actually one of their deep sea tankers just off the coast of New York that unintentionally awakens the Cloverfield monster. Now, what we're told is the Cloverfield monster was sleeping deep in the ocean, and that somehow this Tagaratu drilling operation awakened the beast. Now, this leads us to everything. There's actually no specific mention of the Tagaratu company in Cloverfield. However, there is actually a slight glimpse you'll get when the group is running on I think it's the Brooklyn Bridge, trying to flee the city. They hear an explosion, they look off to the side, and they see a burning oil rig or oil tanker with the Tagaratu logo on it. Another interesting fact, as you look through the ARGs, you actually come to find by looking at the Tagaratu website, a subsidiary of this company is actually Slusho, which in addition to being a major Easter egg found through numerous Bad Robot productions, both film and television, is also the soft drink company that we are told that Rob, our protagonist of Cloverfield, is actually moving to Japan to become the vice president of. The secret ingredient of Slusho, what makes it so different from its competitors, is that its secret ingredient is seabed nectar. Seabed nectar, which comes from the bottom of the ocean, which we've already kind of touched on, what was found there. Another key we see of this, another clue depicting this, is that Rob's brother Jason, at his party, and I guess throughout the incidents of that night, is actually seen wearing a Slusho t-shirt. Numerous fan theories have connected the Slusho secret ingredient to the Cloverfield monster over the years, and I think it's more than an interesting coincidence. Another thing people look at is a sign from the Slusho corporate website and another ARG, which shows us in the comments section one particularly off-putting comment. In it, we're introduced to a talking mouth that tells us, "Slusho makes my stomach explode with happy." Now, in addition to being broken English, it's also another thing that kind of tips its hat at a clue. When Marlena is bitten in the subway tunnels, we find first that she actually gets exceedingly nauseous, putting a hand over her stomach and looking rather sickly. Moments later, her eyes start to bleed, and she's then quickly swept away and taken behind a curtain into a tinted area. Inside the tinted area, we see her silhouette swell impossibly from the stomach and then explode in a shower of blood. Is that the connection to Slusho? Is that the way in which it makes you quote-unquote explode with happy? A couple theories bouncing off of this suggest first that the creatures themselves, the parasites or even Clovey himself, might have been feeding off of the same seabed nectar and as a result have a higher concentration than is safe for human consumption. Another theory is that they actually produce this seabed nectar and that it could even be harnessed or extracted from their eggs, thereby making it deadly to humans to have such a concentrated dose injected into their bloodstream. The final note from the Cloverfield movie is in the last shot, which comes moments after we presume we witness the deaths of Rob and Beth. In a shot dated 1 month earlier, approximately, April 27th, we see Rob and Beth at Coney Island. In that tape, you see a glimpse of something fall from the sky and land into the water. Now, we're told that's a piece of satellite debris, and alternate theories have suggested that rather than the oil rig actually awakening Clovey, that it was this debris. I actually think that there's more to this debris than we have yet to really understand, even with some of these new theories, thanks to Cloverfield Paradox. More on that in a bit. In an ARG for the second film of the series, 10 Cloverfield Lane, originally called The Cellar, we see a statement from Tagaratu stating that Tagaratu used the Hatsui satellite to try and identify a rogue piece that is thought to have fallen off the Japanese government's Chimpanzee 3 satellite. This is viewed as an excuse for the corporation to get involved in what we learn are the events of Paradox. As for 10 Cloverfield Lane, as I said before, it was not originally envisioned as a entry in the Cloverfield franchise. It was actually, through most of its production time, called The Cellar, and it was only later on that the Cloverfield references were kind of sprinkled in there, which, while also true for the Cloverfield Paradox, in fact, could actually explain why this one is more distant compared to the other two installments. Giving further perspective to this notion is executive producer himself, J.J. Abrams, saying that 10 Cloverfield Lane is more of a blood relative to the first Cloverfield film. In one of the ARGs leading up to the film's release, we actually saw the resurrection of the Tagaratu website. On it, we saw a subsidiaries section that identified key staff members, including one notable employee of the month, a Howard Stambler, played in 10 Cloverfield Lane by John Goodman. On this page, we learned that Stambler was a telemetry analyst for another subsidiary of Tagaratu, Bold Futura. This seems to draw one of the few connections between 10 Cloverfield Lane and the previous film. It gives us some insight into how Howard knew an attack was coming and had been able to prepare for it well beforehand and build a doomsday bunker. On the surface, that's the only real connection to the previous film, as we don't actually see Clovey in this film. And thus we arrive to the Cloverfield Paradox, the nexus point of the entire series. Not only do we get the origin of the Cloverfield monster, at least as far as how it interacts with this world, we're also introduced to quite literally infinite plot thread possibilities, making it exceedingly difficult to piece together any kind of clear narrative for the series. All the same, I'll give it a shot. Decoding more documents from another ARG, we learn that Tagaratu has actually been working on this revolutionary energy source technology, which we come to learn is its particle accelerator approximately 1,000 times more powerful than any built before it, the Shepard particle accelerator. It's an accelerator so large and powerful, it can't even be fired from the surface of the Earth. As such, the Cloverfield space station is created, and a team of scientific experts are sent up from all across the world. At the time of launch, we learn that the planet has about 5 years left before it reaches critical depletion of its energy resources. The goal of the particle accelerator is to tap into the energy of the Higgs boson, or the God particle, which was in fact the original title of the film before it became worked into the Cloverfield lore. Flash forward in nearly 700 days and 47 failed tests later, the Cloverfield team has still yet to yield any real results. As such, tensions are riding high, and below them the planet is on the brink of starvation and war over resources. Understanding they only have the fuel for 2 or 3 more attempts, the team is forced to recalibrate their calculations and try something different. And it's during these final preparations that things begin to go awry. While the team prepares its last-minute preparations, the onboard physician, Monk, turns on the TV to a live news broadcast. On it, we're introduced to a man named Mark Stambler, a conspiracy theorist and author of the book The Cloverfield Paradox. Now, if the name Stambler sounds familiar, it should, as 10 Cloverfield Lane's character and antagonist was Howard Stambler. Whether this is a familial bond or simply a different version from a different universe of Howard Stambler remains to be seen. Another interesting fact is that the actress who's actually playing the news anchor is the same crazed woman who tries to break into Howard's bunker in 10 Cloverfield Lane. Now, is that saying that this is the same woman years later who not only got her shit together, but managed to get a good-paying news job? I don't think so. I think it's simply another indication that this is a different timeline whereby the slight differences, such as the butterfly effect, she now, in this lifetime, has managed to live a much more successful life rather than the neighbor of a farmer. Now back to Stambler for a moment. During his interview, Mark Stambler warns of dire consequences if the Cloverfield station continues to fire its Shepard particle accelerator. He warns that every time the beam is fired, the crew risks tearing open the fabric of space-time, effectively collapsing all of the universes onto themselves and shredding the fabric of the universe, not only on their station, but everywhere. The present, the future, and even the past.
This experiment could unleash chaos, the likes of which we have never seen. Monsters, demons, beasts from the sea.
To clarify.
Now, in addition to being incredibly on the nose regarding the overall franchise, this is an ominous message to say the least, and, considering what we know about the rest of the franchise, rather prophetic. And wouldn't you know it, Mark's fears are immediately proven true. As the crew activates the particle accelerator, the beam quickly becomes unstable, overloading the Shepard. This leads to the ship being ripped from its reality and cast into another, landing somewhere beyond the sun. What's more, this new universe is quite similar to their own, save for a handful of notable differences. The most significant of these differences is that the Cloverfield of this reality was in fact sabotaged by its lead physicist, Schmidt, after war broke out on Earth and his German government demanded that he keep the Shepard offline until the Russian threat could be neutralized. In this process, that Cloverfield station failed, crashing back to the planet and killing everyone on board, save for a lone engineer who strangely appears trapped in the walls of the main crew's Cloverfield station. After some time, it seems as though the universe itself becomes aware of the abnormality of this second Cloverfield crew and begins to take them out one by one as if it was a Final Destination flick. In the end, only 2 crew members survive to make it back to their universe, we think, by firing the accelerator once more. Upon doing this, they seemingly reappear in their own reality and establish connection with Central Command. Back in their world with a stable energy beam, they believe they've effectively saved all of humanity. The 2 inform Central Command of their success and are forced to take their leave from the station due to rapidly depleting energy and life support. Piloting one of the escape pods, the pair descends through the atmosphere just as our protagonist, Ava Hamilton's husband, is informed of her return. Rather than be happy, though, he's instead incensed, even horrified, that Central Command wouldn't first have warned her of the dangers with those things everywhere. Now here, the use of plurality seems to suggest there may well be more than one Cloverfield monster in this timeline. And the reality of just how horrifying that is realized in the next shot. As Hamilton and Schmidt's pod breaks through the clouds, an enormous Cloverfield monster crests the skyline and releases a deafening roar. This Cloverfield monster stands head and shoulders above the clouds, making it several thousand feet tall. And for the sake of comparison, the Cloverfield monster seen in 2008 was estimated to be somewhere between 250 and 300 feet tall. So now that we've covered the basics, let's get down to the brass tacks. As Mark Stambler warned, the Shepard accelerator ultimately opened a tear in the space-time continuum. This not only resulted in the crew being cast into another reality, but created a portal of sorts through which the Cloverfield monsters arrived on Earth. As the ripples cascade through time, the only logical conclusion is that each film is in fact set in one of these different realities, with 2028 being the nexus point that damned them all. We saw in the second reality of Paradox that the crew was mostly the same, but with a different engineer and an extra crew member in Ava Hamilton. This doesn't mean that those two people are the same, but rather that the different decisions, a la the butterfly effect, resulted in slightly different outcomes. Mark Stambler may well be that reality's Howard Stambler. The news reporter in Paradox might even be the farmer's wife in Howard's time. Or they may simply just be variations of similar people. This becomes even clearer when looking at the disasters of each film. In 2008, a single, believe it or not, infant Cloverfield monster ravaged New York City after appearing deep within the ocean. In 2016, the Cloverfield monster itself isn't seen, but an alien invasion of some kind is launched against the planet, prompting Howard to build a doomsday bunker. Whether the aliens would follow in 2008 or 2028 is unclear. Finally, in 2028, where it all began, the worst is seen, as God knows how many fully grown, massive Cloverfield monsters ravage an already decimated planet, short of resources. Initially, when rewatching these three films, I thought that Ava and Schmidt's escape pod was going to be the debris that we saw land at the very end of the original Cloverfield. However, there are a couple different logical fallacies with that argument. First, while time travel would not be any kind of problem for this series given everything else we've been presented with, Ava and Schmidt make contact with Central Command, referencing a dire energy crisis and the desperate need for their mission to be a success. So unless they somehow passed 20 years into the past as they made their way to the escape pods, it's simply not possible for these two events to have occurred simultaneously. This would also be undermined by the lack of a giant Cloverfield monster cresting the skyline the moment they arrive back through the Earth's atmosphere. Also, the date on Rob's video tells us that it's a full month before the Cloverfield monster makes its first appearance in New York City. Another fun fact is that Cloverfield 4 Overlord is set to be set in 1945, the night before the D-Day invasion, and it's set to, I think, play more on the demons aspect, as I think we're going to get some essentially zombie Nazi action. So that should be fun. This franchise. So essentially that's the Cloverfield timeline in a nutshell. The main problem I have with it is that by using the multiverse, each film exists independent of its own, which means any Easter eggs or clues really have no connection at all. They're loose at best and they don't matter. You can't have a happy solution or conclusion in one film and know that it's going to help the other films. Ultimately, you're doomed, no matter how you look at it. Now for the bonus round. Here are the parallels between each of the films and the various theories that give them their support. Keep in mind this is a collection of various theories from different fans. Only a couple of these observations I made myself, although I'm sure even in those, I'm not the first. All three films open with a blackout, shown in Cloverfield and the Cloverfield paradox. And in the one occurrence where there's not a scene blackout, there's still a radio report as Michelle is driving her car at the beginning of the film.
Power has still not been restored to many cities on the southern seaboard.
Turning our attention to the movie poster for 10 Cloverfield Lane, we see a single extended line branching off of the L upward. In the Cloverfield Paradox movie poster, we see two letters now with extensions branching off, one of which, the second I might add, branches off of the same L. Is this a sign that the second timeline seen in the Cloverfield Paradox is actually that of 10 Cloverfield Lane? It's almost impossible to say given their entire stint in this second universe occurs in space, therefore we don't know much of what's going on Earth. But the news reports we do see have an absence of reference to the alien invasion. Now here's something I picked up that I think a lot of people are still overlooking. People talk about as many as 4 timelines between the 3 films. Cloverfield is Universe A, 10 Cloverfield Lane is Universe B, and the Cloverfield Paradox has 2 timelines with Universes C and D. But recall this, when Mundy loses his arm in the Cloverfield Paradox, Schmidt tells us about multiverse theory and how there are infinite universes all trying to occupy the same space. When he asks Mundy if he can still control his detached arm, Mundy tells him that he is unable to as he's trying to give him the finger. This to me implies that the arm of Mundy we see is not the one he just lost, but rather another universe's Mundy's arm. From this, we can also assert that because the Cloverfield crew has died in this universe, we'll call this Universe D for now, we can assume it is not that universe's Mundy, which therefore suggests that there is a third universe in play in some form or fashion. As such, I think we are looking at as many as 5 universes with observations. The same thought then can be extended to look at the missing worms. Yes, we know that a litany of worms burst from Volkov's dead body after he's flatlined, but those worms actually appear slightly different from the ones we see at the beginning of the film. Further, the same way that Mundy loses his arm and then that arm appears in another reality could also suggest that the missing worms, at least of one universe, even if not the primary Cloverfield Paradox universe, are actually, in fact, those giant worm creatures we see in 10 Cloverfield Lane that lifts Michelle's car. This one is admittedly a little bit of a reach, but let me know what you think in the comments on that one. In 10 Cloverfield Lane, both Howard and Emmett describe the initial attack as a blinding red flash that lit up everything everywhere. In Paradox, we see that the particle accelerator produces a reddish-purple blinding flash. And given the tear it creates across space and time, it makes sense that this would be observed everywhere, regardless of their proximity to the disaster. In a blink-and-you'll-miss-it text message on Michael's phone after the explosion, we see a text message from a friend asking, "Has anyone been outside? Is the air safe to breathe?" This is an obvious reference to 10 Cloverfield Lane and John Goodman's character, Howard Stambler, warning several times that the air is contaminated. Another of Michael's text messages reads, "Help, we're trapped in our apartment, 402 PA Street, number 345. We need help." 402 is the helicopter identification number Lily, the presumed lone survivor of the first Cloverfield film, escapes on. This is probably nothing more than a subtle Easter egg, as the initials for this contact in Michael's phone are not Lily's. When Mina Jensen, the second engineer aboard the now doomed Cloverfield space station, is first rescued, she is seen with a beam piercing her left shoulder just below the collarbone. This is exactly the same injury Beth suffers in Cloverfield. In the Cloverfield Paradox, the crew is forced to save the space station from drifting critically off its axis at 25 degrees. Beth's apartment, meanwhile, is observed being approximately 25 degrees off-kilter due to the wreckage from Clovey's rampage. In fact, the Paradox ship is listed as 22.8 degrees, rapidly approaching the critical 25-degree mark. Basing the angle of Beth's building off of the one shot we get from a distance, we determine that it is also approximately 22.8 degrees. The similarities don't stop there, though, as we see in the next shot when they're trying to cross over from the adjoining building to Beth's rooftop. The shot is framed almost identically as what we see in Paradox. Finally, we arrive to the last-minute antagonist of Paradox, Mina Jensen. When Mina is first heard trapped within the walls of the ship, we hear a blood-curdling scream very much like that of the Cloverfield monster's roar.
What is that?
This sound is again replicated in a subdued manner as Mina calmly stalks our protagonist Ava Hamilton and attempts to kill her. Another interesting theory is that the differences in the timelines and why the Paradox event doesn't affect them at the same periods is that each universe has a slightly different starting point. Written history of humankind in our own universe can be drawn back to a certain point. However, if in one of these other universes it started at a slightly earlier date or a slightly later date, you could still see an observation such as 1945 or 2008 or any of these other time periods, it's like our own but still starting later than our own. As such, in Universe A, the Paradox event could have happened in the equivalent of 2008, in 10 Cloverfield Lane, 2016, and so on and so forth. Meanwhile, Universe D in the Cloverfield Paradox is by far the closest one in terms of similarities to the Cloverfield Paradox's primary universe. This leads us to believe that its starting point is almost identical to the primary universe of the Cloverfield Paradox. As one of the few differences noted is that Ava Hamilton's children have not yet died in a fire. And that pretty much sums up the Cloverfield timeline. As far as we know, that brings everything that's been made available to us thus far as much together as you can, considering we're in a multiverse and we could have anywhere from 4 to 5 universes that we're dealing with. For more content like this, go to thedallasprospect.com and check back on our YouTube channel every other week. If you like what you see, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And hey, if you want to help the channel grow, think about supporting us on Patreon. Even just $1 a month makes a huge difference for the kind of content we're able to put out. Patreon subscribers can help choose the next month's content. What are some other complicated timelines you want to see us tackle? Comment below and let us know. Until next time, guys, I've been Darreck with the Dallas Prospect. Peace.